Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. And I was thinking 10 years of corporate, that is quite a long time. That also triggered the question by myself, what was I doing 10 years ago? 10 years ago, how did I get into this? 10 years ago, I was working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I was a diplomat. And at that time, I got the opportunity to step into a position where I could develop the partnership program of the Dutch Minister of Foreign Affairs, of Development Corporation. The minister personally said, I want to have a program on public-private partnerships. I don't know what it is, but I want it. So for me, that was an opportunity. And an opportunity as a diplomat is also a step into your career, so that's how I went into this. 4 years later, I decided to resign from the ministry, but that's something that's not so relevant, I think, at that stage. So at that time, I set up a 50 million, really a PPP fund. Schokland is a terrible name for foreigners, but that's why we chose it. I was a portfolio manager and I set up the fund, and we developed a way of working. So I was closely involved in how these things are developing in a ministry, in a bureaucratic organization, big organization, where people clearly were not ready for this whole issue. Why I'm telling this? Because it was for me also an opportunity. And I think the most partnerships that started at that time were opportunities. Something is coming by, you meet someone, ideas are starting, and you just run into that. After that opportunity, what happened to me is that I started working in 2010 as the director of the Amsterdam Initiative, which is a huge partnership, public-private, with bigger companies like DSM, Unilever, research institutes, GAIN, the Global Alliance, to set up a partnership. Because I was talking partnerships in the ministry, and then suddenly someone told me, why don't you do it yourself? So that's why I stepped into this job. And I can tell you it's a totally other cup of tea. And since then I worked in different positions, and now I'm the interim director working on strategic alliances for a program of the CGRR. The private sector, I won't spend much time of that, but it's very wide. There are a big variety of stakeholders, from national, international, private enterprises to the millions or billions of individual people who try to earn their living, private companies, small entrepreneurs, farmers. I think I will talk a little bit more about the last category. I'm lucky that I'm the first speaker, so I don't have to take care of what others are going to say. And what is the private sector? Can have different roles. They can be direct recipient of aid. I think that is something that is not happening so much anymore. They can be contractors, the traditional PPPs. They can be a partner, which is the most challenging one, to become partners. Not partner with the private sector, but both sides. Or they can be providers. You have philanthropic foundations, corporate donations, and so this is growing and growing. So there are a few global trends that, because I have to set the scene, so these global trends, the real ODA is, the Development Association, is declining due to different reasons. And the private sector is all seen more and more as a development actor and a partner. That's at least what all donors say in their programs, in their chapters. It's not always what they do, but it's what they say. And you have very different approaches, country approaches, from PPP, public-private partnerships, where you're trying to link companies and NGOs and others, and private sector development, where you try to develop, to create an enabling environment for private sector to grow. And what is a big change is that aid or support is seen as a catalyst to generate additional funding. It's always an idea, if we can give less, maybe the private sector can give more. So this private sector has an important place to role, but the question is always, how are you going to do that? And of course, as I said earlier, you have an increased investment also of private sector. And the bigger donors at this time are private donors. Bill Gates, these kind of funds are much bigger than most bilateral donors. So trend in partnering approaches. What I want to show you an impressive picture, but what I want to say is that there is a change. You can describe it in very different ways. But partnerships are from the total philanthropic part. That means there's no real link with the core business. The company has had its value, added value, had made its earnings, and then is going to share it, giving money away, so to say, for doing things good. Transactional is that you try to sell something, or that you try to work together in companies, with companies, for instance, in developing countries. Or it also means that you want to comply. And that's what the CSR was. Comply with international standards, with all kinds of standards. Now it's going more towards integrative and even transformational. Transformational means that you have your goals, you have your shared problem, you want to solve something, and that is your starting point. And then you are going to see, how are we going to do that? Who should do what? That's a different approach from, I have some money and I want to spend it. So as I worked for a PPP funding mechanism, there are downsides from PPP funds. They are always not fitting on the very complex way of partnerships. Partnerships are moving targets. It takes a lot of time. It's very difficult to make a proposal, get a stamp of approval, and work like that. I have never seen a partnership developing like that. My experience is that PPP funds, 30 to 40% of the money is going to the wrong projects. When you look back, you say, they are complying with everything that we asked, but it's not what we want. And you have difficulties like, how do you build the government role into the governance structure? How can you be funder and partner at the same time, if you want to be partner? And these funds are also very much focusing on processes, system innovation, and less on products and services. So there are a lot of challenges. And one of the challenges is that, how do I make links with the demand of the local consumers, of the communities, the entrepreneurs in the countries where I want to work? How can I give money to people that are not in my country? How do I do with accountability? And how can I, as a donor or as a partner, start stimulate processes for innovation and co-creation? Because that are the words you should learn now, innovation and co-creation. So that means that partnerships are changing from a goal in itself to a mean to reach goals, to tackle problems, to find solutions for big issues. And that means also that organizations have to develop a partnership portfolio. The ministry had 50 million, 25, 26 big partnerships, and then they thought, how can I link them to my core business, to my development goals? That means you have to rethink and say, what kind of partnerships do I need to reach my goal? But the companies have to do the same. So it's a very complex process. The focus is very much now on inclusion, the groups that need most, the low-income groups, the people that are vulnerable. How do you reach them? How can private or market mechanisms help to reach these people? So we start now, the partnerships are more working like networks, hubs, organizations working together, pool funding, And I think you will see a few very great examples from the people that are speaking after me. One I want to specifically mention is what we call inclusive innovation. That means that if you want to have products or services that the people need, you should involve them in developing it, in innovating this. So you should use the market to get products. And that also has to do with the difference between demand and need. Development agencies tend to think in needs. People need something. But the need is not the demand. People are hungry. But if you give them money, they may buy a bottle of Coca-Cola instead of 2 or 3 kilograms of potatoes, because there is a demand. And so what, for instance, was built in the Netherlands is what we call, the name is really impressive, is an inclusive business accelerator. That means if you want to get something done, if you want to have support entrepreneurs, producers, consumers, you have to create an environment where they can do what they think they need to do. For that they need to create business, so they need support for the businesses. They need risk capital, and I think that's a big issue that will maybe also come later in the presentations. Investors are only interested to invest in something if they know it will work. But how do you get ideas through the very difficult phase, the valley of death they call it, to bring it to investors? And there are a lot of impact investors also in Africa and Asia. But how do you bring the innovations to them? I think that's a big step. You have to help them in understanding of low-income markets, local innovation capacity, co-creation and partnerships. And a business incubator brings that together. And for instance, the business support services are delivered by local agencies, but could be financed by donors. The risk capital is delivered by these impact investors. There are a lot now, I think. Understanding of low-income markets. That's something that other people can bring in. So how do you bring all this knowledge together in one program? And these hubs are situated in Ghana, Vietnam, Nigeria. And I was involved in the process with the Dutch government of funding, and it was a very difficult discussion, because why should the Dutch government fund something that's so far away in another country? How can you control it? So I think my message is just to show that we are changing the approach, the attitude. Partnerships, I'm a partnership practitioner, I'm a broker. I'm involved to get partnerships moving, to start them, but what I also see is that at certain stage they don't need me anymore. That's why I did the Amsterdam Initiative for 1 year. I set it up, and then they need a real manager who likes to tick the boxes, likes to make it work. So you should be open that you change roles and that people get different responsibilities at different times. I think the time is over. So.